Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm really thrilled to follow that barnstorming speech by Mark. I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that he introduced. I'm an engineering geologist by training. I specialise in the design, or have specialised in the design throughout my career, of open pit mines and quarries, particularly to recover construction raw materials. I'm a member of the Pan-European Resources and Reserves Reporting Committee, and I've got experience in dispute resolution and dispute avoidance, and particularly in mediation. So where I'm happy, my happy place, is in the interfaces between disciplines and in trying to make those interfaces work and pulling out from them the opportunities and trying to spot the risks, hence the title of my talk, Mind the Gaps. I want to start with this now very familiar diagram that's been put up by a number of speakers this week already, but I want to unpack the CRISCO classification and reporting standard a little bit for you. So what I've shown there on these two axes, what you see on the left is where geology happens. And this is many geologists' happy place, and they're extremely good at what they do in this space. And here are the modifying factors. This is where we consider the modifying factors, and I've deliberately drawn this line extremely long and going right underneath and underpinning what the geoscientists do. And that is because of this definition of mineral resources. You can read it for yourself, I won't read it out. And there are mineral reserves. But what I want to pull out of that is the concept for resources of eventual economic extraction, and extraction in reserves being reasonably justified. I'm going to mostly talk about resources and the opportunities and risks that sit there. That's, to many of you, a very familiar definition of a competent person, the person who reports in accordance with the CRISCO codes and standards. These are practitioners who take personal responsibility for the reports they prepare. This is quite a well, an extremely responsible job. It's a serious business. So just unpacking that diagram and the standard a little bit more, we've got three kinds of reports that are produced. They have a similar, within these boxes, they have a similar cast of specialists as we move to the right, but they're not necessarily the same people, and the project may change hands more than once during its life cycle. There's generally more complexity within each box as you move to the right. We get more sophisticated models and the need for expertise. And generally, this is the way things are done. There's a competent person, qualified person, or a group of such people bringing together the work of specialists in these three general packets of modifying factors. And there are, I've drawn two-way arrows so that you can see where the instructions and reporting flow. I want to give you a bit of an example from my world of construction materials. This is based on a real site, but it's been slightly embellished, not much actually, to illustrate some points. So you see here that we've got what is reported to be a measured resource, and that classification is the basis for the sale of this site and this opportunity, this project. So money has changed hands. fresh lot of consultants have been appointed. The original reporting geologist, his work is done. The first thing that happens when the team gets together is that the geotechnical specialists realise that there's a highly dangerous situation built into the design here, where the bedding is undercut and there's a high water pressure. The geologist who wrote the report did not appreciate, why would he? He's not a geotechnical person, didn't appreciate these serious safety implications or the impact. You can see the impact on viability. That's all that's left, ladies and gentlemen, that's recoverable, because you need to have a sloping footwall that's drained. And critically, no conversation took place at resource estimation stage with a geotechnical specialist or mining engineer. Aha, says the client, we can limit this damage by diverting the stream, and we can extend the pit limit to the east and maintain a safe footwall. No, says the ecologist, you can't do that. The stream is ecologically important. It's part of a protected area. By the way, the ecologist is feeling really pissed off at this point because it was in his report all the time and nobody read it. His report was prepared some years ago. And then on the other side of the pit, the team determines that the area identified for waste rock over here is simply too small. The landscape architect that's laid out the site and identified the area for the tip did not appreciate that there would be bulking and also some process waste to put in. And sadly, the damage limitation, the obvious damage limitation of moving the excavation limit to the west is not available, and the next door landowner won't sell. Furthermore, he's the chairman of the local action group by now, and so here we have the community already entrenched before the project moves to any kind of community engagement. And we have the consultants in the unenviable position of an emperor's new clothes moment. So perhaps a better position to be in would be the people responsible for this quarry design being at the centre with, I've drawn my permeable disciplinary boundaries here and this triangle. And we might operationalise this in this way. And you see here on these arrows, I've put my resources here. So there's lots of work going on to really look at reasonable prospects for eventual economic recovery right at the earliest stages. Across the top, you see all the external issues. You see lots of double-headed arrows across this diagram, signifying the communication and the sharing, except here. This is the only single-headed arrow in my diagram. And this is why, as a geological community, we should really take care to understand what reasonable prospects for eventual economic recovery really means before we get this cat out of the bag and set all this detailed work going. I'm very happy to share my slides with anybody who would be interested in receiving them afterwards. So here are some consequences of not minding the gap. We're missing early opportunities to foresee problems that we're going to have. We have a potential, as mentioned earlier this week, of a disconnect between corporate and site level. So at the corporate level or the planning level, lots of promises may be made to the regulators. Plans are drawn showing a waste heap size that's really far too small, for example, or a pit geometry that's simply unachievable. And then you get planning permission potentially, or a permit to work, and it's impossible to achieve. So how can we navigate these gaps? What do we need in addition to the undoubted professional expertise? Well, these are some of the things that I would say are the extra magic that goes into managing these gaps and interfaces, avoiding causing gaps, bridging the gaps. They're, if you like, the seasoning that elevates the ingredients of technical expertise and experience. Without this seasoning of care for the gaps and interfaces, the dangers of the silo mentality, sticking with what you're comfortable with, is hugely increased. The risks of unforeseen but certainly not unforeseeable disasters are elevated. And if you remember earlier in the week, so those of you who were listening in, one of the speakers talked about his experience of finding that show-stopping events were actually on the risk register, but had been overlooked or not believed. I think the more complex the project, the more gaps and interfaces there are between the normally absolutely excellent work in the individual disciplines. More time passes, more money is spent. Inertia, disbelief, embarrassment, these are all powerful barriers to the emperor's new clothes moment. The project and getting your fee paid, that's another big barrier. Projects that are too big to fail, even if a fatal flaw is found. Regulators and politicians also join us with this unconscious bias, especially for a large project of national significance, saying this is not going to work as expected. They're really, everybody's very reluctant to do that, obviously. So the resource evaluation stage is not just about geology. A lot of it, the geology is essential, absolutely vital, but it sets the scene for everything that comes after. And I just leave you with some of my thoughts, because it's written down in a report or risk register. It doesn't mean it's being communicated in any way to anyone. Excellent regulation, we've got lots of that. Possibly you might say too much. It's very difficult to keep tabs on, to keep up with. But it's essential, but it's not sufficient in and of itself to guarantee good outcomes. Compliance is also clearly related to regulation. It's vitally important, but if it's just box ticking in a silo, or an echo chamber, as Mark mentioned, it's entirely unhelpful. It's really important to have this extraordinary level of intellectual capital, of professional competence, knowledge, innovation, and ingenuity in our industry, right through the value chain. It's astonishing, and listening to all these amazing talks this week, it's heartwarming, and it fills me with pride that our industry is so well educated and deploys such expertise. But it's not always very well joined up, and I think this is, in my experience, this is a barrier to true responsibility. I just want to end by saying that forums such as this conference, and it's being held in this format, driven by the COVID crisis, represent very, very welcome safe spaces to ask each other some fundamental questions. And the fundamental questions that I think we should be asking each other, and feel safe to ask each other, is, oh, why do you do it that way? What do you need from us? That's a really important and scary question for asking members of the public, NGOs. And then what do you actually mean by whatever it is? So with that, I'll end back with the Emperor's new clothes, which we're going to avoid. And you'll find a little more information if you're not familiar with the world of quarrying and construction materials. The Quarry Design Handbook is free to download at that link. I should just also say that I've benefited hugely by rubbing shoulders over many years with geologists and mining engineers from the metal mining, so grown-up mining industry, and I'd like to think they've learned a bit from me and other colleagues on the PERC committee and in other forums in our world of construction materials. The issues are the same. The trajectory and the complexity of the projects can be somewhat different. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Ruth. There are lots of expressions of congratulations coming in over chats, etc., and also requests for your slides, and even people giving you their email addresses in the hope that you might contact them in the future over YouTube. So congratulations. Wow. Thank you very much.
I hope you're going to capture all that. I haven't got to. Oh, yeah, somehow we will.
Yeah, don't you worry. We're capturing this. So I think with this, Ruth, and actually you've teed up our panel session that we're about to go into really beautifully. But a question for you before we go into that panel itself, and this comes back to that competent persons with an S on the end of it, and what you were saying about how the geologist is obviously core to this, all puns intended, but actually there needs to be a team of people often, or a range of different expertise that can be pulled together in order to be able to succinctly and adequately determine what that resource reserve, etc., might be. Where have you seen this work really well, and do you have any hints or tips as to what organisations should be doing to better bring together those groups of people?
I saw it work really well first. I've seen it work really badly in all over the world, and in the UK, but in other places in the world. But I saw it, and what changed the course of GWP, which was the firm I was with for 38 years until late last year. Then it was called the Geoffrey Walton practice. What changed the course of our business was being involved with Rugby Cement in 1987, just as the environmental impact legislation was the directive was about to be enacted into law in the UK, and the project manager at Rugby Cement, who was looking for a planning application, managing the preparation of a planning application for a chalk pit in Rochester in Kent to serve the cement factory there, in a site of special scientific interest, ancient landscape, you name it. We had every designation. He decided two things. One was to buck the industry trend, just to put a few arrows on a map and send it into the planning authority, and then do all the detailed work in order to fight the planning appeal that would inevitably result. So to really work through that design diagram I showed, the process diagram I showed earlier, and he also said that we should work on the environmental and social, the nuisance aspects, as if the environmental impact regulations already were in UK law, and that's what we did. And it was a tremendously formative time for me, because he engendered this collegiate team that was well led and gave us all opportunities to ask I could ask the landscape architect, well, why do you need to do that there? ask the noise person, well, can't we just have the noise bank a little bit lower? And times were slower in those days. Everything, you mentioned coloured pencils earlier on. I drew all those plans with a rotary pen and coloured pencils, and I measured them with a planimeter. But there was lots more thinking time then. I think sometimes the whiz-bang technology gets in the way. It's very, very helpful, indeed essential. But before we get to the whiz-bang technology, just keeping it simple and talking and asking each other, challenging each other in a gentle way, being heard and hearing what other people have to say. And it's exciting, and there's so much opportunity there, because somebody will see your unconscious bias when you can't see it. You can be down a deep rabbit hole and somebody can ask a question from another discipline and you think, aha, no, why have we always done it like that?
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Ruth. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for another round of applause for the wonderful Ruth Allington. Thank you very much, Ruth.